Hi, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for being with us today. Thank you for having us. We are going to do a little introduction. So if you have not done so already, feel free to get a drink, get cozy, get some water, settle in. We are super excited to be with y'all today and to get to talk about porn. So maybe if you haven't already, drop it in the chat. Where are you calling in from? If you want to drop in your favorite porn sites or anything like that, feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself. We'll start off with some introductions. My name is Mahx Capacity. I use they, them pronouns. And I am one of the original founders and the current creative director and owner of Aorta Films. To give a little visual description, and I am a white, fat, trans, non-binary person. I have curly dark hair, a mullet. I'm wearing a David Cronenberg Crash t-shirt. I am wearing glasses. I have a septum ring and some tattoos. And I describe myself as a Taurian pleasure prince. I am calling in today from Brooklyn, New York on Lenape land. And my practice with Aorta sort of takes sex tech and regenerative economics and my background in experimental performance to sort of wield the power of queer porn to send cultural fault lines out into the world to disrupt it for the better. I am obsessed with queer porn. I'm so excited to get to talk about it with you all. And through my work with Aorta, I get to do just that. So I consider myself to be very, very lucky. And I'm so excited to be here today with my co-producer and longtime collaborator, Papi Femme. Papi, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Mahx. Hi, I'm Papi Femme. I use he, him pronouns. I am based in the New England area of the US. I'm currently a co-producer with Aorta Films, and also a curator of our community hardcore program. I've been collaborating with Aorta in very, very many capacities over very many years. I started out as a performer, and I've done everything from consulting on costumes to editing our films to directing. And right now my focus is in directing and producing and curating, like I said. I'm a fat, white, Latino trans person. I'm also a kinky trans daddy. I'm super, super excited to be here today and talk a little bit about what we mean when we say ethical porn, and talk more about all of the juicy, beautiful ways that we have found out more about ourselves through working in porn and talking about porn. Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Mahx, am I leaving anything out?
No, I think that's a great intro.
Cool.
I love it when you talk about all the roles that you've done in Aorta, because I really do feel like you've run the spectrum, everything from being our chef to our director to our, to a thought partner. So I love hearing you give that list always. So today we definitely want to answer a bunch of your questions. We're hoping to run this sort of like a, AMA style thing about indie porn and ethical porn. But before we get into that, we wanted to talk a little bit about Aorta Films, which is the studio we run, and share a little bit about that history with you. And then we also wanted to talk for a second about what ethical porn actually is and what we mean when we say ethical porn. So if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll try and go through this part in the next 10, 15 minutes, and then we will dive into your questions and leave the rest of today just for that. So to share a little bit about Aorta Films with you, Aorta Films is an internationally award-winning independent queer and trans porn studio, and we talk about our work as being lusty, opulent, ethical fuckery. Aorta Films was founded in 2015 by myself with two collaborators, Parts Authority and Ginny Wolf, who has since left the company. And when we started out, we were really sort of making porn as an artistically driven practice among friends. We were trying it out. We had no experience in it, although we had experience in other areas of art and practice. And we really just wanted to make a porn company that centered queer performers, centered a large range of bodies and identities, and featured lots of different types of sex and kink and intimacy and pleasure. over the last 8 years, we've grown and grown. And the last 2 years, we've really started to shift from this really artistically driven grassroots process and practice into being more of a sustainable small business. So we've been growing our team. We're in the middle of our first capital raise and investor search. And it's been really exciting to sort of see not only our library and the amount of films that we've produced grow and grow, but also our infrastructure and the ways that we work together and collaborate and do business. Our mission, to put it really simply, is to embrace what we already feel to be very true, which is that porn has equal cultural relevance and equal power, both artistically, intellectually, in terms of a cinematic form, as any other mode of media. So all the stories that get told across film, cinema, literature, music, podcasts, comic books, every other form, we think porn can do the same thing. And we're really interested in using porn to, like I said, try to change the world for the better. So Papi, maybe I'll kick it over to you. And do you want to share a bit about all the different ways that we are starting to think programmatically and developing our offerings and all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a little bit more about the actual content and art that we're putting out into the world. So I'm really excited to talk to you about the 85 plus short films that we have in our library. That also includes feature film. We have a really gorgeous body of work that features all kinds of bodies, gender expressions, gender identities, abilities, kinks, sex practices, dynamics. It's a really gorgeous library that I hope you'll check out, and is really the thing that really started off the work that we're doing. Community Hardcore is a newer one of our programs, and that's our new platform for hardcore queer content from independent creators that are curated from all over the world. We purchase content directly from the people who are making the content, and we're building out a really incredible, rapidly growing library that showcases an incredible range of smut from this golden age of at-home porn production. Definitely check it out if you're looking for hot material that feels really homemade and authentic. Induction is a project that is in its first iteration. So our induction series invites brilliant thinkers, makers, and doers from adjacent fields into the porn underground. So I'm super excited to share that our first induction guest collaborator is the best-selling author Carmen Maria Machado. She has a 30-page script titled Haunted that we are going to be shooting and producing this year. So that's something to definitely keep your eye out for. We're going to be featuring that on our website in a sort of a multifaceted presentation. Yes, we're very excited about that. That's been a big thing for us this year. Bedded is a semi-annual watch at home queer porn festival that we host. Every December and June, Mahx curates 3 films from queer porn creators that we think are really expanding the genre and really are people who are really excited to introduce to our audience. We also have a small commercial work for hire wing called Aorta X. Aorta X is available for hire, where we bring our production expertise and skills to your production. We've produced a music video for LA-based artist Sievert. We also have done documentary work and stuff like that. I know this is a lot, but the last thing is workshops. So this summer we prototyped a workshop program for the first time. We had a handful of really interesting, wide-ranging workshops, and that really showed us that there was tremendous hunger for people to learn about more advanced topics in BDSM and kink. So that's something we're sort of pausing and reassessing the program for now, because obviously we have a lot of things going on. But that's one more area that we're sort of experimenting in.
Awesome. And I think you can maybe start to tell from the way that Papi is talking about it, that one of the things we're really excited to do at Aorta is to think programmatically and think about what are all the different ways we can look at porn and pull people into making porn. And And so we're just really excited to keep like growing and expanding and experimenting in that way. I think at the heart of a lot of our work is this like deep love of experimentalism and getting to not just sort of reiterate and make the same thing over and over again, which is one of the things porn is somewhat known for, but to really be experimental in the field and figure out how we can make something that maybe people have never seen before, but are really excited to get to experience. So thank you for that overview, Papi. I saw in the chat someone was asking for links, and our friends at Field just dropped our website in the chat. We would love to have you check it out. We'll say this again at the end so you have everything, but if you also want to use our discount code, it's FIELD, F-E-E-L-D, all caps, 24, and that'll get you 30% off any membership on our site. We would love to have you check out our work. There's also some free content on there, so feel free to go and explore. So before we get into taking questions, I'm seeing some questions come in the chat. Super exciting. Very excited to dive into all this. Before we get into that, I want to talk really quickly about what we mean when we say ethical porn. Ostensibly, right, all of you are here with us this evening because you saw the title ethical porn and were interested, right? So we know in some ways what we're meaning when we say ethical porn, right? The thing that I want to think about or talk about when we think about ethical porn is what we're really saying. So if we look at the history of porn, largely in the United States, but also in South America and Europe, and certainly not just in the US. If we look to like the 70s and 80s and the clash of the culture wars or the porn wars, what we see is this genre of feminist porn evolving out of that, right? Of feminists sort of taking the means of production into their own hands and creating their own types of pornography to make the argument that porn isn't inherently demeaning or isn't inherently problematic or isn't inherently anti-feminist, that it's really just about what the content is and how it's being made. And so that sort of genre of feminist porn over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen it really evolve. And it started to get called ethical porn and be under this large umbrella of sort of this moniker of ethicality. Which I think in some ways is really great, right? It lets people know that there are lots of great options out there. It tries to fight stigma. It opens up the conversation about how porn is being made, which I think is all great things. The tricky thing with it is I think what we're seeing right now is sort of a large scale emigration away from what we used to call the adult industry into now pleasure and wellness. So a lot of like sex toy brands, porn companies, anything having to do with sex work are really trying to distance the ways that they're related to sex work and instead talk about being a part of, health and wellness. And again, parts of this are great, right? Like the way that breaks down stigma around sexuality is really wonderful. But I think it also serves as sort of a gentrifying force, and in sort of divorcing itself from the adult industry can create a lot of stigma for sex workers in general, especially full service sex workers and folks who don't have the flexibility to sort of code switch in that way. So a lot of times when we say ethical porn or hear ethical porn, what we're really trying to say, or what that brand is really trying to say, is actually something else, is actually for women, or HD, cinematic, or indie, or queer, or experimental, or narrative, or not on Pornhub, right? So ethical has come to mean sort of this super wide umbrella of things. And I think it's really important for us when we talk about ethical porn, what we're really talking about is the modes of production. So it is a labor issue because sex work is work, right? So when we talk about ethical porn, what we're saying is that there are clear contracts, that those contracts have been sort of hammered out in dialogue and negotiation with all the performers and the crew and the people who are going to be serving those contracts. It means that there is clear pay discussed beforehand. It means that there is clear sense of what they will be doing that day. It is all stuff that they consent to and negotiate. And in terms of Aorta Films, is usually really collaboratively designed. And it also means that we do a lot in the negotiation leading up to shoots, at the shoots, after the shoots, to really make sure that this is a conversation, it's a dialogue, and that performers know that at any time they can say, oh, I'm actually realizing that I want to do this differently, or I feel like shit today and I don't want to do that. Oh shoot, I shouldn't swear. I feel gross this morning and I don't want to do that this morning. Right. So I think it's really important to us to hammer home that idea that ethical porn really means the labor practices rather than anything aesthetic or identity based about it. So sort of from here on out, I'm going to talk about what we do as indie porn, as queer porn, as experimental porn. And we're also really happy to share more about how we work and what that labor practice looks like. And so you can also rest assured that our practices are, really, really focused on being as ethical and supportive to our performers and our team and our crew as possible. Did I miss anything in that, Papi? I know I was getting into my ethical spiel.
No, I think that's beautiful. Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you.
Awesome. So we had some backup questions, but the chat is already like blowing up with many great questions. So maybe we can just dive into that. And if we want to come back to some of the questions we've prepped, we can do that after. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds great.
So Chris asks, topic disclosure and destigmatizing HSV, whether it's HSV 1 or 2, either can be oral or genital and not routinely tested for, yet one isn't seen as need for disclosure or the good kind, right? So there really is, I think, a lot of stigma around HSV. Papi, do you want to talk a bit about like what our STI screening process is? And happy to share also about sort of how we take a stigma informed.
Yeah, totally. So we take a really performer-led approach in sort of all of our behind-the-scenes negotiations and all of our pre-shoot planning. So one of the things that that means for us is when it comes to safer sex practices, that's really determined by the people who are going to be participating in the scene. That said, we do have some sort of guiding principles and parameters around that. So we oftentimes we'll be shooting couples who are fluid bonded. For people who are not fluid bonded, we ask that people do like full panel testing, and we don't require a certain kind of testing like through the talent system. We know that can be, that the talent testing system is both set up for wonderful specific reasons, and also it's not something that we specifically rely on for our shoots. We encourage people, or we make space within our negotiations to specifically talk about test results, desires for any kind of fluid exchange that will happen on camera, and also desires for barriers that the performers want to be using together. So that's really led by, performer needs, and really thinking about it in terms of not so much like a one-size-fits-all approach. If a scene is just going to be having rope bondage in it and isn't necessarily going to be having like sex with genitals, for example, like we have space within our negotiation protocol to sort of like tailor the negotiating beforehand to reflect the content that we're going to be shooting.
Yeah, and I think one way that we've talked about it before in like other interviews and conversations, right, is like, yes, sex and kink and BDSM is inherently risky, but living is inherently risky, right? Like getting in a car every day to go to work, or riding the bus or a train, walking outside, right? All living involves risk. So rather than saying that certain things are too high risk to be a part of our practice in this sort of one size fits all way that can be really stigmatizing, a lot of what we do, like Papi was saying, is really talking about what is the risk. And if everyone is aware of the risk, then they get to make their own decisions about what level of risk they're consenting to. So for some performers, knowing that their co-performer has HSV, might mean that they want to use certain boundaries and barriers in terms of what sex they're having. It might mean that they, want to do some sex acts and not other sex acts. But that is a performer-led decision, and it's something that we see as really essential, just in the same way that we negotiate in a scene what the narrative arc is, or what sort of sex acts they want to do, right? Negotiating which barriers want to be used and what people's status are is just sort of in that soup of all the things we're talking about. So, I think Papi and I really see our roles in the shoot often as directors as facilitating those conversations and opening up a space that feels safe and inclusive and structured enough that performers can have those conversations without stigma and without shame. Yeah, and we hope we do a good job of it, because it means a lot to us to work with performers who feel comfortable disclosing any of that, and are in a really great process of being able to talk about their statuses really openly as well. That was a great question. Thanks for asking, Chris.
I see a question about how we decide what content to produce next, and it makes me, Mahx, maybe we can like do a little greater convo about like what the process looks like, sort of from start to finish of like conceiving a scene, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what shooting looks like for us.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. So this is okay. Where do I start? So yeah, in terms of conceiving of content, deciding what's being shot, we this is another place where we're extremely performer led, which yeah makes me feel really excited and really happy when I think about it. You know, we have 85 plus films on our site, and those are conceived in such a huge variety of ways. And I will say that the real connection between those is performer interest and performer desire. Um, there are times when Mahx or I are directing something and have a little bit more of a specific vision, but really a lot of those ideas come out of conversations that we have with performers. So it's a little bit related to like our casting process and stuff like that. So I'll talk about that a little bit. But yeah, so we have a really like relational way of working. That means that we spend a really long time getting to know performers before inviting them onto set to work with them. There's a lot of reasons why that feels important. And I think trust building is like a huge one of them, in like a really mutual two-way street kind of way, like really wanting to get to know people in the way that they work and show up at work, and also wanting to show people, you know, like what we're all about and what it looks like to be on our sets. We also, I think one of the reasons it takes us a long time from the first time we connect with a performer to the moment that we cast them is because we're doing matchmaking. So a lot of the time when we're getting ready for a shoot or thinking about people, we're really thinking about it first by performers we're excited to work with. And then the next question is like, who would be a good match together? So that's actually like a really fun process. It involves us having like really deep conversations with performers about their desires, things that they feel like they would be excited to explore, things that feel like they would feel really like sparky and inspired to feel really creative about. We like to ask people what kinds of people they like to play with and connect with, like sexually and intimately. So yeah, there's just like really thoughtful matchmaking that goes into that. Ideas for scenes often comes out of those first conversations. So for example, we last time we did let me think, not this last fall, but the fall before that, we had a big, lovely group shoot. And in some of the conversations, it came out that multiple of our performers had like a dental fetish, like a dentist role play fantasy fetish. And hearing that, we actually ended up like creating and producing a scene that is like a dentist role play scene, because it was this sort of like niche interest between two of our performers. So that's sort of like the way that we're thinking about how scenes are created in some way. And yeah, like there is so much incredible content to choose from. There's so many things. I think that it feels like like the wish list of things to shoot, and feels like it grows and grows every day. And by things to shoot, I mean like types of play, performers, people's identities that we want to make sure feel like included and represented and reflected in our work. Yeah, so it's a very like multi-pronged performer-led process, in a lot of like really deep ways.
And I would say that even for the projects like our first induction series film Haunted that Carmen Maria Machado is writing, is a really good example of this. Even in the occasional productions where we sort of go in with a script and an idea of what we want to shoot, and a really somewhat sort of set understanding of what a scene might look like, that collaborative process is still very much at play. So even though we were casting for those roles, which is something that we don't usually do, it was very much a conversation with everyone who applied. You know, would you feel comfortable with all the sex acts described here and dynamics described here? And then we even get to go a step further and say, you know, okay, here's what's written, but when you look at the script, like how else do you think this person would engage in sexual relations? How else would you, think, what sort of kink do you think this person would want to bring into that dynamic? I'm, as you can see, struggling really hard to not swear because I'm not sure what YouTube's algorithm is like these days. But it gets to be really collaborative. And I think that's part of why Aorta is getting attention and gets support, is because we're able to make these scenes that do have some relationship to authenticity and feelings of like genuine excitement and desire in them. I'm seeing a question in the chat that asks, are performers paid more fair and or higher rate than usual porn stars and sex workers? But honestly, they don't know what this rate usually is, right? So again, I want to really underscore here that there's not a right or wrong way to be doing this. There are many different ways to have fair labor practices around porn. There's a really amazing book called Porn Work, which I just moved, so I don't have my books behind me, but usually I would pull it out and show it because I love it. If you love reading about labor and pornography, it's a really great read. And she talks about, sort of from a labor perspective, analysis of the mainstream industry and the indie industry. And I think there is sort of a public conception that the indie industry, again, the ethical industry, is more fair, maybe better paid, driven by fulfillment and authenticity and all these things. And she sort of makes the point, mainstream porn is more of a performance. It might be more of a job, right? Where you're showing up and doing the labor of performing and you don't have a personal relationship, but those folks are actually paid a whole lot better than the indie industry, which is usually pretty grassroots. We've been sort of raising our rates steadily since we started because it felt really important for us to be, if not paying mainstream rates, at least on sort of the top end of indie industry rates. So I can share with transparency, because transparency is a big value for us, that right now we pay performers about $500 a scene. In the mainstream world, that number is much higher. It's somewhere more like, I would say maybe $1,000 to $3,000 a scene, depending on what the scene is, who the performer is, if they're represented by an agent, all these things. But one of the main differences between sort of payment in the indie industry and the mainstream industry is, in the mainstream industry, there is still a lot of different pay for different scenes, different pay for different genders, different pay for different races and sex acts. And one of the things that feels really important about the way we work is that it's just a flat fee. If you're performing in a scene, everyone gets paid the same. It doesn't change depending on, if you're willing to do anal or not, or what your race is, or anything like that. That just feels, really reductive and not the way we want to operate. And I'll say yet again, because it's really important to us, right? That's not an unethical way of operating necessarily. I think it is a complex labor issue. But again, it's just one example of how there's a difference between the two industries without either being, evil or bad or should be stigmatized. So I think a way to think about indie porn is that we are really coming from a really grassroots place, right? Just like independent music or film or art or any of these things, right? So we don't necessarily have the same funding as mainstream, but what we are trying to do is make a really amazing working environment and make sure performers get to feel included and feel collaborative and often express a part of themselves that feels in some way authentic or exciting to share with the world. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Papi.
I think it's such an interesting thing to see the ways that actually, in a lot of ways, things that are labeled as ethical porn, oftentimes those indie productions have less money to pay their performers. And so it's very complex, the way that we're referring to porn and talking about what's ethical and what's not, things that are being referred to as ethical versus things that are not meriting that label by sort of the general public. It's extremely complex issue. There's a lot of people in the indie porn ecology who are doing the work for very little pay, and who are people that we think of as indie porn stars, who probably also have day jobs, because it's really it is in fact a small industry.
And I think one of the things that we're always talking about too within the industry is, under this sort of understanding of ethical porn production, that doesn't just mean that we have to pay performers and performers have to be paid as much as possible, right? There's so many different ways to work that are ethical. And I think, again, the label of ethical just really means, are you having a conversation? Is there clear understanding? Is there a transparent contract? So, sometimes we'll do something called a work trade, where it's like, okay, we're going to shoot with a performer and no one is getting paid, but we all get to use the content and profit off of it. Or a lot of times there are some amazing like punk companies or anarchist companies out there that are really insistent that no one's getting paid, but everyone's putting in the work together and doing it for the love of the thing. So it is a really nuanced, diverse landscape. And I think that is, like, for me, one of the joys of getting to share about indie porn with new people is that I think there's a misconception like, oh, there's so little of it, it's hard to find, there's not much being made. And the more and more that you get to know about indie porn, the more you can see there's just like a vast landscape of all of these people making porn in many different ways that are all really interesting and cool. And maybe to follow up, Rob, I'm seeing in the chat your question, how do you figure out what material is in demand from your viewers? So this one is a little bit of a two-part for us because, like I said, we started really grassroots. We started for sort of the love of the art, and now we're in this moment of transitioning into more of a business sensibility. So, to be transparent and vulnerable with you all, like within the last 2 years is really the first time that we've gotten things like our Google Analytics, our Salesforce CRM, like all of these tools to be able to analyze how our films are doing in place. And I think, initially we were just sort of going on vibes and like really feeling out, what we were hearing from our friends and our audience members of what made good films. But I will say we don't do a ton, even now that we have that info, of being like, okay, well, threesomes and rope content are doing the best for us, so that's all we're going to make from now on. I love experimentalism. I hate doing the same thing over and over again. So one of the things that I love about porn is getting to have conversations and try new things and see what the response will be. Like when Poppy was mentioning this dental scene that we shot, I think we were both a little bit like, oh, who knows if this will, get views? Who knows who's going to like this scene? And the feedback we got was like, oh my God, this is so exciting that this exists, right? So I think one of the things I love about porn is that no matter what you make, no matter how niche it is, someone out there is going to love it and find it like deeply erotic and fulfilling. And that really, as an artist, like opens up the most exciting door to me, right? Which is just like, we get to make whatever we want and we get to really play with it. And figure out what feels fulfilling to us. And I think that's really built Aorta's brand into something where, we're not really catering to what's most popular, because that's what so many other porn companies do. Instead, we're really interested in kind of treating it like an art form, which is not to say that it's like high art and not pornography. It is pornography. We're really, really proud of it being pornography, but we get to play with it in this way that feels like it's invested in the experimental nature of it. And because there's that investment, I think we discover things that like haven't been discovered before. And that feels really exciting to us. I don't know if there's more you want to say about sort of our algorithm and demand and all of that, Poppy.
Yeah. Just a couple of thoughts quickly. One is I want to shout out our social media manager, Ginger, who is like the voice of Aorta on all of our social channels and like does all of that work and communicates with our audience in like beautiful, thoughtful ways. And so I just have a couple things that come to mind around thinking about like what appeals to our viewers, because that's actually something I think about a lot. I think especially because part of my work is curating our community hardcore platform, and that involves me like making decisions with the people who created the content about what kinds of content is going to go on our site. So I really appreciate any opportunities that Ginger can facilitate with like our Instagram, like Instagram polls and stuff like that have been a really fun way to like engage our audience and find out what people want to see and what people feel really excited about seeing. In some ways we can only know like what people tell us they're excited about wanting to see. In other ways, we do have this like some great new like analytic tools that are new to us as a company. So now we're starting to be able to look at a little bit of data as far as like, what's getting good clicks on our website. So I do look at those a lot because that feels like it really informs in some ways the kinds of things that I'm looking to like fill out the community hardcore library with. If I see that, people are really clicking on like the trans porn tag like all the time. That said, it becomes a little bit tricky because Mahx and I have talked about this. There's a sort of a potential for this becoming like an echo chamber where it's like we have a lot of stuff that's tagged as trans. So it's no surprise that like the trans tag gets a lot of clicks because it's like so many of the films have that tag. So we're, it's a little bit of like trying to look through the data and understand that. And I think there are ways that, like for the curating work, I do feel like really curious and interested in the data in ways that I think I'm not necessarily thinking about when we're talking about like what we ourselves are going to be filming and producing.
And I also think, Papi, you do such a great job, especially with the community hardcore curation, about being intentional of like, being aware of that echo chamber and both using the information to guide your curation, but also being aware that curation is like a political act and that we want to build a library that is a hot queer library and that also like is the porn we want to see in the world. So I think porn hits this interesting angle where it is instinctual, it's guttural, it's like you don't, the Virginia Despentes writes about it in King Kong Theory, which is a great book about smut and porn, about like the hard on or the wetness comes first. And then you have to rectify that body reaction with this feeling of, oh, I'm turned on. What does that tell me about myself? Is it what I thought I was, or is this making me see myself differently? And so it is something, right, that's bound up in, all of the isms of our world and all of the structural inequities of our world. And I think you do a great job of really thinking about, of course, skinny, white, sort of classically beautiful performers are going to get more clicks than, everyone else. And as Aorta, our brand is really a deep, heartful love of like all different identities and bodies and kinks. And how do we really like both listen to what is in demand and sort of challenge our viewers is the wrong word, but how do we support our viewers in sort of having a more expansive view of what their porn appetite could be? And I think that's been a really fun thing too, to be like, oh, you don't think you like dental films, huh? Like you want to look and just see, and maybe you do. When we were prepping for this event, Papi and I were talking about like how have both of our individual appetites and self-discovery and porn viewing experience changed in our time here. And I think both of us were like, yeah, our kink practice, our porn practice has changed so much over the years. And I think part of that is because we get to see all this amazing porn and don't sort of like pigeonhole ourselves into thinking we only like one thing. I'm curious, Papi, is there more that you want to share about like what's changed for you over the years as a porn?
Yeah. Well, I think like as a porn viewer, I think a lot of us resonate with that experience of being like, oh, I could never be into that. And then like you see something and you're like, unless maybe I am into, like I think that a lot of us have those moments in life. And for me, I've had those moments like throughout my whole like life as a sexual person. I definitely like remember so clearly like insisting like as a younger person, like, oh, I could never be into leather. In fact, I am now a leather worker and like a leather daddy. So it's just really funny the ways that, sexuality continues to evolve through our lives. And I think porn is such an incredible way to like discover that and see that and experiment with that in ways that feel really like in the safe container of like your own privacy. And I feel like, it's been really exciting to see the ways that, I'll say, so there's, I feel like there's things that I feel really excited to showcase You know, for example, we had like our first film that featured like golden showers like a couple years ago, and that was the first film that I directed for Aorta, and that felt really exciting to me because I was like, you know what, like I feel like there's people out there who are like, maybe this isn't my thing, but maybe the rest of the scene is hot enough, and they get to the point and they're like, oh wait, like I'm learning something new about my sexuality. And I feel like that way about like a lot of the things that we get to show and share, because I just know that like sexuality is such a journey for people over the course of their lives. And yeah, it's so funny I'm like, what things will I be into, you know, when I'm 65? Like I'm so curious to know. I'm sure that it will like never stop expanding. um yeah, Mahx, what about you?
Well, yeah, just hearing you say that like is making me think too. It's like, right, like so many of the things, like when I'm watching porn, I love eye contact. I love seeing like sparky chemistry between performers. I love a scene that is like deeply perverted and rough and hardcore and then like has a forehead kiss somewhere in there, right? And it's like all of these things, because the porn watching experience is now really mediated through, you know, digital algorithm and through search terms and categories and tags. It's like, yeah, at some point the things that you find to turn you on and find engaging about porn are probably not the categories, right? Or the go-tos in that way. So I think that's one of the things that indie porn can offer is like, as you get to know certain studios, you get to sort of develop a like, oh, right, is that the thing that's going to turn me on, or is that the vibe? And that's been a really fun thing to find, that it's not just like, oh, I don't just like this category, I like this feeling. And who do I trust as a maker to sort of consistently give me that feeling, whatever that feeling is? Yeah, I think for me, like the experience of shooting our first explicit scene, where we were shooting this film called The O Files, which was our first sort of featurette. And we had done some non-explicit scenes leading up to it. And then we had our first scene where people were actually like, you know, fucking on camera. And I just remember being in that room with the filmmaker, and I like had this moment as the director of being like, okay, they're having sex. Like we've done all this build up to make sure that they feel good and supported, and we've negotiated and all this stuff. And now we're diving into this like, you know, thing that feels very risky and advanced. And I was like, oh my God, like, is this hot? I don't know if it's hot. Is it hot to me? Is it going to be hot to other people? Oh my God. Oh my God. There's no like objectively hot thing. Right. And so I think that experience of being like, knowing that there's no objective hotness. And also I think I really experience or like think about porn production with the lens of like a play party or a sex party. Like when I go to a party, my joy is to be a queer among queer people, seeing all this like life force and joy and love and energy and fun and experimentation and right, like walking into the like chemical amazing like hormonal thickness of that room, right? And it doesn't matter to me that I'm seeing puppy play but I'm not personally into puppy play, or you know, a baby girl daddy scene but I'm not personally, you know, I mean I am personally, but like, you know what I mean, right? Like it's not, when you're at a party or a play party or a sex party, you're not being like, well, I'm only going to look at the thing I want to look at. You're seeing sort of this broad landscape of aliveness. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about getting to make porn, that it's like, it actually doesn't matter what I like. I'm just curious to watch it and excited to watch it. So I think that like job description and part of my work with Aorta has really infiltrated my personal sex life and practice too, where it's like, yeah, I know what I like, but like, that's kind of boring. You know, like what I like is like such a small, you know, such of small importance and small impact when there's so many beautiful things to get to watch and experience. And I think a lot of how we talk about Aorta's work, you know, it's for everyone. And you don't have to be queer to watch our work. You don't have to be queer to enjoy it. But I think there is a special resonance with queer people because it is the act of surviving and thriving in the face of so much like discrimination and othering and death and all of this shit, right? That I think to be able to be a queer person celebrating queer sexuality feels really liberating. which is not to say it can't also feel liberating if you're not queer, but I think it's a little bit special. So that's something that's really maybe not changed for me over the course of it, but just like continued to amplify. Yeah. I guess I'm seeing some questions in the chat about like how we work with performers, how we choose, you know, how we like clue into who we want to work with, if we work with new people. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about that. You know, I think there are certainly some companies that like want to work with more experienced people. I think we have a real range of folks that we want to work with. And I really love working with people from all backgrounds. Like we love working with full service sex workers and burlesque performers and actors and kinksters and right. There's so many ands. It's like, why wouldn't we want to bring everyone into the room as much as we can? I think for me, some things that make me feel interested in working with performers, and Papi would love to hear about yours as well. You know, for me, the biggest thing is like, are they virtuosic in their boundaries and in their ability to say yes or no, or maybe, or I want to try that, but I'm not sure how it's going to feel. And I'm not sure if I'm going to like it, right? Like if I can trust somebody's yeses, or if I can trust somebody's no's, it means then I can trust their yeses too. So for me, the most fun thing as a director is getting to work with people where I really feel free to collaborate and suggest things and ask them if they'll try something, and then know that they'll say no to me if they don't want to do a thing. So that's really important. And I think that's a quality that we find a lot in more experienced and established performers. And it's a reason that we, I think, you know, prioritize oftentimes working with folks who have more experience. But again, I think we're really interested in pulling people into the industry and welcoming people. So it's not a deal breaker if someone is a beginner for us. I would say we usually look for some type of experience, whether that is a personal kink practice or porn experience or stage experience or sex work, right? Like some sort of, experience in that way. What are things you look for, Papi?
Yeah, I think that for me, so much of trust is about someone's communication skills and their ability to advocate for themselves and know themselves. And I think for me, you know, I see a question here about like, what if a performer changes their mind after shooting? And I think for me, I'm like, that just strikes so much fear into my heart as a producer and director, because I think for me, like the whole, like vetting for lack of a better word, but like, you know, sort of like relationship building process with someone as a potential performer is like building a deep kind of trust where I like know that that person is 100,000% comfortable with having their erotic image online forever. Like that is something that at a baseline is like incredibly important, because like it is so important for people to feel comfortable and good after shooting, like more important than I can even like begin to put words to. And so I think for me, like a lot of that trust building process is like knowing that someone is like deeply confident in themselves and their decision to do porn, because it is not a decision to be taken lightly. You know, we know that the internet is forever. So yeah, I think one thing that I really look for is, like Mahx said, like some kind of experience that lets me know that a person has like a lot of comfort advocating for themselves and communicating. So I think something I really appreciate is working with people who are kinky, even if they don't have sex work experience. I find that obviously this is like not, you know, like not true for every single person in the world, but I find that a lot of kinky people have a lot of strong practice around being able to negotiate around their hard limits and boundaries, around their preferences and desires. And so I think, you know, I really appreciate working with people who are sex workers and full service sex workers, especially because I think that there's like a tremendous amount of skill that is brought into the room with people who are like used to doing to negotiating with people, used to negotiating with people for the first time, used to like having these kinds of like conversations and like all different kinds of contexts. You know, we're really going to be creating like a very like soft and welcoming and like gentle entrance into those negotiation practices. And I want to know that the person coming into it is like feels very like that I won't have to worry that the person will feel hesitant to like name their needs and desires. And again, that's like also a two-way street. Like that's about the environment that we create and about the ways that like we make ourselves open as listeners, and about the ways that we facilitate like a group dynamic when there's like a shoot happening. So yeah, I think those are things that like really come to my mind, is like wanting to have like deep trust the person, and part of that trust means like, you know, we know that the person's gonna like show up on the day of the shoot and not just like not show up and not tell us, you know. So it's like stuff like that I think feels like important to us, and like trust building and getting to know someone.
Yeah, and I think sometimes like with talent, right? Like there's a sense of like my background before porn was in dance, and people would always be like, "Oh, how do you do that? How do you remember all the steps?" It's like, well, I work at it and I develop skills that are really necessary to being good at this job, right? And I think performers in porn are the same. It's like there's so many skill sets that are really important as a porn performer, right? Like not just like negotiation abilities or hotness or like sexiness on camera, but like can you keep all your like emails and gigs organized? Are you someone who can build intimacy with someone quickly if you show up to a shoot and don't feel a spark, right? There are all these skill sets that I think performers develop over the years. And the more skilled a performer is, you know, the better the work relationship is often. So it feels like, you know, it's like we're definitely looking for talent. We're definitely looking to build deep trust, and we're looking for people who take this seriously as a career. I see we have a question in the chat about like if we ever work with folks who want to be on camera but also want to remain anonymous due to day jobs. And I think we've taken a pretty like principled stance that we don't. I certainly wouldn't rule it out forever, but it seems like you know, first, I think it's high risk, and I personally just wouldn't feel comfortable employing someone knowing that it could ruin their life or, you know, get them fired from their job if they were, you know, found out to be a porn performer. That just feels like too much risk to take on. And I think even more so, you know, it feels important to honor the risk and the labor that people who are out as porn performers, you know, take on in taking on that work. You know, we definitely work with a real range of folks who are, you know, various levels of like out to their family, out to their employer, out, you know, in sort of their social life as performers, and who are not, and have a really strong separation between those two. But I think the basic act of deciding to show your face in porn and, you know, negotiate and navigate all the risk that comes with that and all the stigma feels like, you know, as Papi was saying, a really essential part of have you really, you know, wrestled with the decision making about if this is the life for you. You know, and I certainly know there are a bunch of folks who are able to make careers staying anonymous on camera, and certainly in the mainstream industry, there are more folks who are sort of like lower body only or always masked. So it definitely is possible, but I would say for Aorta, it's not the way we go. And to me, that primarily feels like in respect of, you know, the labor and risk that people take on who are willing to do that, and who have decided to do that with their lives. I don't know if you feel the same way, Papi, but I don't want to speak for you. That's where I land.
Yeah, I think we have maybe a few films out of the like 85 plus where there's people whose faces aren't shown, and I think really that's like, yeah, I think it's really important for us to feel really like certain that people feel really like committed to yeah, the decision, and that they really understand that yeah, that there's you know, like we will own the distribution rights to the film. Like we really want people to understand like what the agreement is that they're having, and that's why that's like a huge part of the negotiation that we have ahead of time, is being explicit about like, here's where the film's going to go, here's what's going to happen to it afterwards, like we will send it to film festivals, like we will use it, pictures of the film, you know, like just really letting people to know what to expect, so they feel really confident before they sign on. It's like hugely important to us.
And hopefully within our lifetimes, right, we see that stigma go down. So, you know, within my lifetime, I would love to be in a future where it's not stigmatizing for people to be in porn, and that's a decision that adults get to make about their bodies, and make about their, you know, activities, and it doesn't affect employment or anything like that. But yeah, for right now, we're still in that stigma place.
Yeah.
I know we
And
have to
certainly, like, not, oh, I was just going to say, certainly not all of our performers are out. Like, everyone has their own journey of like being out and where they're out and who they're out to, and like that is like a wide range that we, you know, like we don't even know all that information. Like I don't know who a performer is out to in every place in their life. So I think, you know, we also try to operate with just you know, just being really clear about expectations on all sides.
Yeah. I know we have to sort of start to bring this to a close, but Papi, I wondered if you wanted to share like one of your favorite shoot memories or like a fun story from on set or something like that, to close us out.
Yeah, and I also want to do a plug for community hardcore before we're all done. But yeah, my silly shoot story is just that Mahx and I were filming at an undisclosed location at a property that we had rented, and there was a scene being shot in like one of the rooms, and it was like, you know, it's like all quiet on set, like everyone in the house has to be very silent because people are filming, and
it was like an intense scene. It was
a
very
intense, like long scene, and like the room had been like blocked off with all this like plastic sheeting. It was like this whole complex scene, and it was like I was in the house, not a part of the scene. I was there doing other things. There was 2 other people on set who were also like set support, and like there was a bat. There was a bat flying around the house. That like I came downstairs, like there was like a bat flying around the living room. It was like swooping over the sex toys table. Me and the 2 other people had to be like totally silent and not react because there was filming happening in the other room. Afterwards, Mahx had to like call someone to be like, do we all need rabies shots? Like, what's the protocol? And, you know, it's like a very sort of like, apparently it's very serious if you're in a home with a bat. Like, if the bat's near you in any way, like you have to go get a rabies shot. And it like became this whole complex thing. We did not have to get rabies shots because it was actually like very limited, but that was like a very eventful.
And there's a great video from behind the scenes.
It's a video.
You whisper screaming, being like, there's a bat, there's a bat, there's a bat. Like,
trying to like crack it because it was flying around the room. It had flown in through like a chimney.
Yeah. My favorite set story is when we were filming our feature film Whole. We were filming this amazing like sensation play gangbang with one of our performers, Shay Knox, at the center. And it remains to this day one of my favorite things we've ever shot. But, you know, it was like 5 performers, all part of the scene. Oh, you were a performer in it. Yeah. Papi was a performer in it. This gorgeous scene. We're shooting it there. And there was this beautiful, like juicy orgasm. And then this wonderful, like come down and aftercare. And, you know, we called cut and finished filming it. And all the performers were like, okay, we're done. That was fun. And I looked, and like me and the camera person and the lighting person and the set service person all were just like silently crying because it was just like the most beautiful thing we had ever experienced. And that like remains sort of like my constant experience getting to shoot this work. It is just like unbelievably gorgeous to see people getting to experience joy and pleasure together. So that is one of my favorite memories. I know before we close out, we have like 3 minutes and we wanted to plug a few things. You want to go first with Community Hardcore?
Yes. So you've heard me talking about Community Hardcore, which is our new platform. We're actually buying content directly from people who are making content. And that includes all kinds of people. So whether you are a person who has like an OnlyFans and you've been making your own content for a long time and you're just looking for more places to distribute it, we'd love to talk to you. Or if you're a person who's like a little bit of an exhibitionist and maybe you have a couple of fuck tapes that you filmed at home, we would love to see those too. Really trying to curate like a super wide range of stuff. Excited to accept like all range of production values, from like phone shot things to things that you filmed on a camera. Accepting things of a wide range of lengths and contents, accepting things with one or many performers. We have a simplified intake process now. So if you go to our website and go to the Work With Us page, there's a spot there where you can apply and share your content with us. We will get back to you about potentially hosting the content on our site, being part of our Community Hardcore library. I also just want to say the community hardcore library is great to watch too. So it's available to all of our members, and it is like rapidly growing. We're really scaling it up pretty fast, and there is like all kinds of really, really hot stuff on there, beyond all the films that we offer ourselves that we've created. There's stuff that people have created from like all over the world, like intimate scenes, dungeon scenes, all kinds of beautiful stuff. So it's definitely worth checking out. And if you're interested in having any of your stuff out in the world, please contact us.
And just clarifying that is for queer folks. We prioritize queer content on the site. And then last thing we'll say is, if you are excited about the way we're talking about porn, if you're excited to check out Community Hardcore and our library of 85 plus films and growing, please go ahead and check it out. Please pay for your porn. Paying for your porn is really the way that more content like this can get made. So we'll drop the code in the chat, but it's Field24, and any membership on our site is 30% off with that code. We would love for you to check it out. Tell your friends, talk about porn, fight stigma by doing it. Thanks so much for having us, Field. We had a great time chatting with you all. Thank you all for the amazing questions and for diving in. And please check out Aorta Films. Find lots more indie porn and queer porn. There's so much out there. And we hope to see you again at other events, screenings, websites, etc. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.